Well, good afternoon. Thank you for attending this session. My name is Juan Mullerat. I'm the principal of Pluservia, local here in Miami. And I have the great honor to share this panel with former mayor of the city of Miami, Manny Diaz, a force in local, state, national politics for nearly 4 decades. Manny was first elected city of Miami mayor in 2001, having never before held elective office. He was re-elected to a second term in 2005 and was chosen to lead the United States Conference of Mayors as its president in 2008. Mayor Diaz developed a vision for Miami as an international city that embodies diversity, economic opportunity, effective customer service, and a highly rated quality of life. To achieve this goal, he re-engineered Miami from top to bottom, including the Miami 21, its zoning code, which he'll talk about. And during his 2 tenure, Mayor Diaz was recognized for transforming the city of Miami, and for many nationally recognized innovative programs in the areas of urban design, sustainability, and green initiatives, education, infrastructure, investment. And I had to cut the bio short because it was way too much, the accomplishments of this of our mayor. Mayor Diaz is currently serving as chair of the Florida Democratic Party and is a senior partner at Lydecker Diaz in Lydecker Law. We also have in our panel Ana Gelaber Sanchez. She's a principal of Gelaber Sanchez, a planning and design consulting firm that serves clients in the public and private sectors. She has over 25 years of experience in the planning field, including serving as planning director of the city of Miami from 1998 to 2010. And that's right, I never thought that somebody could serve that long as planning director and still be alive. Anyway, we're very lucky to have her in that position. That she led the Miami 21 initiative, a form-based zoning code that takes a holistic approach to land use and urban planning to make Miami a more sustainable, pedestrian-friendly, and better planned city. As a result of her work, Miami was the first major U.S. city to adopt a form-based zoning citywide code. Miami 21 won numerous awards, including the American Planning Association's our own National Planning Excellence Award for Best Practice in 2011. Anna was named Top Public Official of the Year in 2010 by Governing Magazine and received the CNU Gross Award on Leadership and Vision 2011. In 2010, she was also awarded a Loeb Fellowship at Harvard University. We also have Francisco Garcia, who took her job, and they're still friends. He is a planner, an urban designer, an architect by training. Mr. Garcia is responsible for leading designs for new communities as well as urban redevelopment and revitalization projects in pretty much every single continent, says here. Most distinctly, Mr. Garcia has over 25 years of experience in the public sector, having held the position of Director of Planning and Zoning for the City of Miami from 2010 to 2020. And we still miss him. He was responsible for the adoption of the Miami 21, working with everybody else in this panel, the first city-wide development code through methodology regulation applied to a major urban area. So this is our panel, and I would like to yield the podium to Mayor Diaz, who will speak to us about the initiative that he started.
Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to Miami, and hope you spent a lot of money while you're here. Once a mayor, always a mayor. So you might be asking yourself the first question, logical question, is how does a lawyer with no experience in elective office and with absolutely no training whatsoever in architecture, urban planning, or city design end up with land use in Miami 21 as his signature project during his 8 years? In 2001, when I was elected, I had absolutely no clue what the terms environmental sustainability and economic sustainability meant. In my first State of the City, I talked about creating a citywide master plan. Truthfully, I also had no idea what I meant when I said that. Mayors face very significant challenges: poverty, public safety, education, jobs. And most recently, keeping their citizens alive and trying to reopen an economy in a safe way. Guess what? City design gets lost in all of that. But it is at the very heart of everything we must do in order to make our cities livable and sustainable. The single most critical step for environmental and economic sustainability is embracing smart growth, designing a city that makes sense, designing a city that works. This idea to create a blueprint for the Miami of the 21st century became Miami 21. It is a code that focuses not on what is forbidden, but on what is desired. It is both a planning document and a guidance document. It merged zoning, planning, and sustainability at one time in one document. And I confess, this is not exactly what I had in mind when I announced that I wanted a citywide master plan. But it is really a classic example of how mayors evolve through time. So during that evolution for me, I had three what I call aha moments. The first one was a realization that a mayor's most important job is that of chief architect of his or her city. I mentioned a few issues earlier: crime, education, jobs. The figures that derive from these issues will go up and down, and they do so sometimes for reasons beyond the control of the mayor himself or herself. But decisions regarding the physical environment are very, very different. They determine the character and the function of a city for the next 25, 50, or 75 years. They will either serve to enhance the city's future, or they will help condemn the city to mediocrity for decades to come. And once you realize that this is your one real true legacy, you begin to fully appreciate this extraordinary obligation that you have as mayor. And at the same time, you also realize how little knowledge or training you have to deal with this issue of city design. My second aha moment. In 2001, Miami was not exactly known for its environmental stewardship. On the contrary, we had plenty of suburban sprawl, our parks were used as landfills, we polluted our rivers, we had zero green buildings in the city, we had no water conservation plans, and I could go on and on and on. I have always been a very strong environmentalist, so I moved forward with the typical initiatives that other mayors around the country did. Climate action plans, expedited permitting, green procurement, water conservation. We installed solar panels at City Hall, built miles of bike lanes, and on and on and on. 2005 was a watershed year, because in 2005 we had Kyoto and we had Inconvenient Truth. The mayor's reaction to that was to create something called the Mayor's Climate Action Plan, which was our desire to implement Kyoto, which the United States had not been a signatory to institute the Kyoto protocols in our individual cities. So what started out as my strong belief that a city must plan for its future had actually become an integral part of our fight against climate change. All of a sudden, you connect your city design with your city's carbon footprint, and you get a new sense of urgency because you realize that an aggressive environmental plan like the one I described is simply not enough. We can do all those other things. For example, we can buy hybrids. It's still a car. So embracing smart growth for me took on a whole new significance. It was now a part of a greater effort to promote environmental sustainability. So the answer to this global challenge has to be a local response. And Miami 21 was our local response to climate change. And the third and final aha moment was economic sustainability. In the 1990s, Miami was still known as the capital of drugs, murder, poverty, riots, everything bad. We had double-digit unemployment, which was higher than at any time during the Great Recession, and we were under state financial oversight and control. We had a declining urban population, plenty of suburban sprawl, as I mentioned before. And how do you turn this around? Well, you create a climate of opportunity. Through proper planning, and through government investments, you create that environment where the private sector and people and economic opportunity will follow. Another aha moment. City design is also an important economic development tool. The result, we enjoyed the greatest economic expansion in city history. We became a top 10 job generator in the country. Our schools made remarkable gains in academic achievement. We invested over $1 billion in affordable housing projects and reduced our homeless population by 50%. Our crime rates went down to rates we had not seen since the 60s and 70s. Our city's neighborhoods benefited from over $10 billion in infrastructure investments. We basically rebuilt our entire city. In 2001, our tax base for the entire city was $13 billion. Today, the tax base for the urban core alone is $22 billion, and the citywide tax base is $65 billion. We completed 135 high-rise buildings. 135, think about that, in 8 years. Higher than the total sum of high-rise buildings built between 1960 and 2000. Our urban core population is now over 100,000 just in the urban core. We are number 2 in new startups in the country. And we did all that, by the way, while being America's most diverse city with 60% of our residents being foreign-born. The world was already changing before COVID at a pace that none of us could have imagined before. COVID has accelerated that process. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure on cities today to function as incubators of the knowledge-based businesses driving our new economy. And the key to attract workers today is not what they will do, but where they will do it. The more attractive a city, the more they want to live there. Today's highly mobile workers can choose to live and work anywhere, and COVID has certainly validated that. So we want them to choose Miami, and we want them to choose Miami because it is a great place to live, and it is a city that works. Miami 21 was our answer to economic sustainability. Miami 21 was the most exciting and rewarding project I worked on. And yes, if you're wondering, I would do it all over again. We were not afraid to dream big, to take a step back for the sake of our future, and to control our destiny. To set a course to guarantee environmental and economic sustainability, to take a city from good to great, and to leave a city much greater than the one that was left to us. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I had the pleasure of working with Mayor Diaz on Miami 21. I was the planning director, and it was a challenge and a great honor to be able to accomplish Miami 21. We had, everyone says how and why. If I can show you a slide of what Miami's regulations were, and there are two things. One is for the planners that are out there, when you look at regulations, says, oh my God. But it was a blessing in disguise, because the 11 Southern, which we call the old zoning code, was an Euclidean code, and it was a mess. It was confusing. It was many years of short-term solutions to long-term problems. At the end, what we had was what the common word we used was a patchwork of all the regulations. It was impossible. You really had to be either a land use attorney or a master on it. It was impossible even for the staff to follow. And the other thing, it was certain neighborhoods that had the master plans, then you had kind of like that special extra, but there are many other neighborhoods that did not have the attention that probably they deserved. So when we were able to say, let's do something, as Mayor Diaz said, with Miami 21, and the word is used, I don't use it lightly, holistic, because it was not only about zoning. It was about transportation, it was about economic development, it was about arts and culture, it was about sustainability. It was an opportunity for us to say, let's fix this, let's do it streamline the process, the permitting process. But in addition to that, let's make a better city. Let's plan for a better city now that we have this chance. So in looking back, what we had, just to give you the oh my God moment, was not the aha moment, was this is, for example, a little piece of Coconut Grove, for those of you who are familiar. This particular area, and I will just go quickly through these slides, this is as many layers of zoning that it had. You had the traditional, well, you had the land use, you had the zoning, you had the conservation district, you had the special district, and you had whatever anyone else wanted to ask to a particular street. So when you were doing something, and like this is just a quick example of a neighborhood that is extremely stable. Many throughout the city is the same condition. The other problem we had that we understood that it obviously was an issue, in this one it was a site, this was actually a real project, and the way the code was written, you had the rights that zoning would give you, but then in addition to that, if you did A, B, and C, you could get a bonus, and if you did extra, you could even count land that was not yours, because if you had a park, you count the park towards your square footage. So the building, it was, it kept, we said, keep growing. Which, why is that a problem? It's a problem if it's adjacent to a neighborhood that the density is not equal, so there was no transition. And then, so neighbors in the low density areas would come to the city and say to us, you have done something behind our backs, and you've done it, without any public input. It was not the case, clearly. It was part of what the code said. So we would have in those, and this is the one where the building kept growing. Like I said, Miami 21 gave us that opportunity. One, it was, how do we fix and we streamline? But the other part that was key, and frankly, probably more important towards the future, it was all these things that I've mentioned that you're seeing, historic preservation. We were able to address it more directly. Economic development, as the mayor said, we actually, part of the team, of the consulting team that worked with the city, was economic development consultants, because we wanted to know, we knew from planning and architecture what could go wrong, but we wanted to see from an economic perspective, what is hindering the development in particular areas. So we were able to address those. The transect, as many of you, and I will not go into a transect class, but we've went from the zoning categories of one size fits all to a transect, which allowed us to critically go to a particular neighborhood and say, specifically, if you are in Buena Vista, this is what the scale and this is the type of activity. We were able to mix, it's a form-based code, but I will say with a caveat, we did include use. So we were able to, the way that created the categories, we were able to calibrate how much use went where, depending on where you were. So that was the ability that we were able to do with 21. And then because of those things that we were able to address, these other things came into the code. Transfer of development rights, we didn't have that before in the city. That's to strengthen historic preservation. A lot of what we had, we want more, and we want to preserve what we have. Public benefits program, and I won't go through all of them, but the public benefits was key, because the public benefits, the same way the old code had all these bonuses and things you could add up, this one kind of reverted back to the city, and it was able to say, well, you can have this, but that is now, you targeted open space, you had housing, affordable housing, and it was a way of saying, if you do it here, this is what you get. But the city was able to make sure that the bonuses were going not for something that didn't really benefit everyone, but actually benefit the city as a whole. Public benefits, again, affordable housing, parks, that they were critical to the city and that we didn't have before. Sustainability, as the mayor mentioned, and the successional zoning was the other thing that for Miami was critical. Before, people could just go from one zoning to another just by the asking. This particular one said you can only go one, and then you could only go to the next one. So it was a way of, there is growth, things will change, things will be implemented. However, it has to follow some sense of order. It cannot just go from 300 units per acre to 500 without. So it was a way, again, it was another tool that was implemented with the Miami 21. This one, to us, it was an important the public benefits. This is a diagram that basically shows what you do the way that it was with the public benefits without going too much in detail, but it was pretty much tailored. If people did it in the property itself, like affordable housing, then they would get 2 extras, 2 for 1 of the square footage that they were adding. If they did it in an area of need, the same thing. Same with open space. So again, it was a directed effort. It wasn't random, which gave us back the strength to the city to plan not only for some areas, but citywide. And the special area plans, and this is what we believe we were able to have with the shared vision. And we don't take it lightly. 500 meetings, 4 years later, the code was passed. But we enjoyed every single meeting. And with that, thank you very much. Francisco.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. A couple of introductory remarks. The 2 speakers that have preceded me are, there's no question about it, the heroes of Miami 21, and they've been very kind and very generous in describing to you what seems like an orderly process, but those of us who were involved know it not to have been, and they certainly bore the brunt of all that effort. I owe the success that may have been had in my 10-year tenure absolutely to the work that was done by my predecessors, Mayor Diaz, in his leadership of the process, in the visioning of the process, and Anna Calibert, certainly in the crafting and the organization of a document that ultimately has proved successful. So all I really get to do today is to share with you the story of what I perceive to have been the success of Miami 21. And because I, as a planner, and I expect many of you as planners, relate best to images, I will attempt to do so through images mostly. I will bombard you with images for the next roughly 10 minutes. Really, the intent of this is to have a chat session after our brief presentations, and so that is what I am looking most forward to. So I will go through these quickly. I hope you'll find them illustrative of what great work has been done in the city of Miami planning-wise over the last 20 years or so. I think Mayor Diaz made the point very well and gave you some facts and figures. I want to show you the images. Those 2 images are of exactly the same geographical area, namely the Brickell Corridor in downtown Miami. And I think it is appreciable at simple sight to see that there was immense growth from the years 2000 to the year 2010. And that growth, of course, has continued as we well know. Unfortunately, because much of that growth took place in the early days under the old zoning ordinance, which Anna has labeled appropriately as Zoning Ordinance 11,000, that growth came with great challenges and great difficulties. That growth responded to a code that was Euclidean in nature, as has been said, and simply segregated the cities into swaths of land that responded to vastly different zoning regulations. And where those fault lines, I'm going to call them met, you had disparate results, such as the one you see here now, where you have high-density, high-intensity residential towers immediately abutting, and there's nothing more immediate than those images, immediately abutting single-family residential neighborhoods without any provisions or tools really to compensate for the transition between both. That was prevalent throughout the city of Miami. Because it was a Euclidean zoning ordinance, and therefore, I may have touched something I did not intend to touch, my apologies, there we are. Because it was a Euclidean zoning ordinance, and therefore, by definition, a proscriptive zoning ordinance, it told you what not to do, it told the developer what not to do, but not how to do what they were going to do. There were really no provisions for marking or masking parking garages, and the result in many instances was, as you see there, bare bones buildings that simply paid no regard to the context where they were located and all the negative impacts that would have not only on abutting properties, but also on the right-of-way by virtue of the the access points that you see that were absolutely over-engineered and over-designed. And if I may, I don't think I have a night image, but visualize, if you would, any of those parking garages, let's say the one on the top left of the screen, at night, right, which is fully lit with that neon lighting spilling over onto the abutting properties, and occasionally the alarm in a given car blaring in that sort of echo-like chamber. Really unfortunate, to say the least. And so it is no wonder, right, that Mayor Diaz, upon taking leadership of the city of Miami, had identified already and would move forward to propose rules and regulations and standards that would ameliorate this unfortunate situation. I'm going to give you then, next, a select number of images that illustrate what was then, at the time, simply the standard fare in terms of what the Miami street scene would be. Walking down any of the many streets of the city of Miami, you might expect to see buildings as unfriendly and unresponding to the pedestrian environment as the ones you are seeing here, right? Or alternatively, residential development that simply, once again, had no respect for the neighborhood environment and provided as a view to the pedestrian simply an unmasked view of their surface parking lot underneath the building, which sat on stilts. And just next to Brickell, which has been historically and continues to be certainly a showcase of great architecture for all who care to see it, right around the corner there would be these structures that were absolutely unsympathetic and tough to regard. Miami 21 then offered a clear antidote to many of those instances, into that sort of widespread malaise that the city was suffering from. And what I typically prefer to show as absolutely feasible is this kind of an approach. And this is simply one instance of many design strategies that would convert what you saw previously in the building that you will see here to the left as unmasked parking garages that were the plinth for every single high, many multi-story building in the city of Miami, populated by these parking garages. And I will cite also, incidentally, that the building that you see to the left happens to front Biscayne Boulevard, and in regard happens to front also Biscayne Bay. So really, from those niches that you see on the wall, those ventilation spaces that you see on the wall, what you would be looking at is prime view of Biscayne Bay. Shameful, really. To the right, you see the approach required by Miami 21, which forces the developer to line or mask that parking plinth that inevitably needs to occur more often than not, and require that it be masked or lined with typically units, habitable space. And as a result, these two buildings that you saw as a before and after, which happen to be side by side along Biscayne Boulevard, not too far from here, actually, just a little bit northwest from here. The experience, obviously, from the building on the right is far superior to the building on the left, and also they become better neighbors, right? Better inhabitants of the cityscape that we all get to regard. And I think has covered this successfully, and what I will propose to you as the image that we most often use to basically propose the merits of Miami 21 is this image of a pedestrian walking down any street in the city of Miami. This happens to be 8th Street, but it could be any of the many streets in the city of Miami, feeling rather forlorn, one can only imagine. And how different would it be if, through the right mix of use and density permit processes and form-based regulations, we began to transform the rights-of-way and private property into pedestrian-friendly, walkable, truly well-defined spaces, harmonious, as you see in this photograph, in this image. And that really is simply about placing the building in the right location and paying proper respect to the needs of the pedestrian and really to the cityscape as a whole. And it's simply, again, a matter of getting the right order in terms of the regulatory environment that yields the buildings that we see today. That pedestrian clearly then is a much happier pedestrian as a result of this. The other scope of work that consumed a significant amount of the time of the team that prepared Miami 21, of which success I benefited immensely, was a very clear, very graphically oriented, very user-friendly set of diagrams and regulations and lists that really guided design professionals and developers towards a very predictable development environment. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is, that how important predictability is, how important it is to have a predictable development environment, because that will not only tell the developer what it is they can properly and reasonably expect as a yield of their intervention in the land, but it will also at the same time inform all the stakeholders, all those who might otherwise be concerned as to what's coming here next. It will tell them exactly what to expect in a very easy to understand fashion. And so we took great time and great effort in crafting many of the diagrams that accompanied all those development regulations so they could be easily understood essentially by anyone with very little instruction. And it established a very clear order, a hierarchical order and transitional order amongst the many zoning designations, which were essentially reduced to 1, 2, 3, 4, right? T3, T4, T5, T6, and there you see it. We can talk about it later if you care to. Another great intervention, and another reason I think for the great success of Miami 21 was simply the simplification of all those entitlement processes that are so tedious and so cumbersome into very linear, step-by-step processes, supplanting the previous sort of Byzantine mess of referrals and cross-referrals that happened previously. Here's the result then. Here is, as they say, the proof of the pudding as to what came about in great part, if not almost exclusively, from the implementation of Miami 21. And I won't name them because most of you will recognize them, but they are buildings of great sensibility, of great design, of great architecture. There is development that is very much responsive to what one would desire in a first-class city. Even some properties owned by the city of Miami have been slated to be redeveloped in a very sympathetic and appealing fashion. The implementation of the special area plan, which I think was a great instrument, continues to be a great instrument for development. It has been under criticism, and some of it is fair and some of it is not, and we can discuss that. But certainly what it did for large parcels, large assemblies of land throughout the city of Miami to be planned, as in conscientiously planned, so that those large expanses of land did not become enclaves unto themselves, sort of inward-looking and self-regarding, but instead they would be well connected to and responsive to and complementary to the environment around them. Here is, as an instance, Brickell City Center, which was one of the first special area plans that were processed. Many of you might know them, have visited the place, and there are some images of it. Certainly the design district, the redevelopment and improvement of the design district responded well to the special area plan. And so that is again to say that the special area plan is not a one-size-fits-all tool, but rather can respond to high density, high intensity development, or the kind of fine-grained, very medium to low scale, pedestrian-friendly environment that the design district presents today. Another image of it. Miami World Center has been built over essentially the last 10, 15 years, in great part as a result and with the assistance of many of the Miami 21 tools that I'm referring to. And areas such as Wynwood, and hopefully most of you have visited or will have the opportunity to visit Wynwood, made the no less than miraculous transition from something like this to a neighborhood, a district that is now populated with structures such as this or that. And again, work in progress, but I think Wynwood will come to be known as one of the great responses and one of the great merits of Miami 21. So again, I wanted to leave you with a few images that I think illustrate some of the successes of Miami 21 and what Miami 21 did as well in encouraging the interaction between the planning department, not as simply an institutional entity that would govern the implementation of the code, but an entity that would really engage with the stakeholder population, the citizens, the developers, the attorneys, the architects, et cetera, to really begin to fine-tune and grow the planning master plan of the city of Miami over time. And certainly one of the better instances of that collaboration and that participation on behalf of stakeholders can be well illustrated by the next speaker, Juan Mullerat, whom, since he was kind enough to introduce the rest of us, I will introduce as a fantastic planner. We're fortunate to have him here in Miami and have his offices here in Miami, who over the last 10 years has had great success in working, I think, with the City of Miami Planning Department and helping the City of Miami implement many of the special districts that have since then been great successes. So thank you, and I look forward to the chat.
Thank you, Francisco. I'm also known as the pain in the ass at the planning department. Every time I go there, they know that there's a change coming, or at least I'm going to request it. So I guess I'm going to be the one that is in charge to poke at the Miami 21 just a little bit so that we can start a little bit of a conversation and see where it goes. As a preface, the Miami 21 is now 10 years old, and it has seen a lot of changes. And there's a task force that has been put together to look at how the Miami 21 needs to change in order to address the challenges that we have today, which are not exactly the same challenges that we had 10 years ago. So I'll start by reminding myself and putting out there that cities are not just made of physical elements. So we have the tangible and the intangible. The tangible are those physical elements. They're the solids and the voids. They are those that create enclosures and create streets and provide comfort in space and volume. They're systems, services, and they're regulated by zoning codes. They're regulated by comprehensive plans, as you all know, and they are also regulated by the charter. But there's also the intangible. And the intangible, I would argue, is sort of like in a kind of hippie way. It's the spirit of the city. It's the identity of the city. It's the identity, the culture, the social constructs, the beliefs that people have, and each of these may differ quite greatly between neighborhoods, between blocks, and sometimes streets. And in Miami, this is extremely important because we are, as the mayor pointed out, one of the most diverse cities, if not the most diverse city in the country. And these are also somewhat regulated, or at least the zoning codes try to regulate these, but further they're regulated by design guidelines. The comprehensive plan also, with our objectives and policies, try to address these. There are, as you know, there are things in our cities that you can't really name, things that make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable, and they are a result of a combination of factors. And these are not always tangible. Cultural, social, political, prejudicial differences in a city. Sometimes you don't like your neighbor, you don't know just why, right? And so the Miami 21, what it did is it calibrated the tangible. It built an environment, or it was designed to build an environment, as most zoning codes do, and there have been a number of amendments over time, and especially, and this is what I want to focus on, overlays that have attempted to calibrate the nuances of neighborhoods to create and to better define the intangible, capturing, let's just say, the DNA of the city or the different DNAs of the city into regulations that adapt to the current needs. And these are, again, updated over time to address those needs as they change. So I'm not going to go into how the Miami 21 was put together, because they've done a great job doing so already, but needless to say, it was a very lengthy public process, and it resulted in a code that applied a transect-based pattern on the whole city. And the transect essentially is the same. T6 is T6, here, there, and everywhere, and T3 is T3 with some modifications as to what types of uses, as Anna mentioned. But it basically created a pretty incredible skeleton from which to build. So it essentially simplified the DNA, all these DNAs that we had in the city, and it created a structure that improved predictability and also the administrative processes. So this is my take on the previous code. The previous code that is called the 11,000, or as some of us like to remember, is the 11,000 ways to get lost in a web of references when looking for a simple setback dimension. And the Miami 21 took that jumble of things, pulled it apart, looked at what was important, and tried to make sense of it, and created, as I said, a baseline for this diverse city. So think of it more or less like an operating system, right? So you have OS X in your Macs, and if you're Windows, I don't know what Windows number we are on today, but OS X, for instance, is the Mac-based platform, and you couldn't do very much with it unless you had applications. So Apple depends on its developers to develop those applications that allow you to either modify a picture or write a document or even make a presentation such as this. So the Miami 21 created that OS X, and it is up to us, planners, to create those apps that better identify and better regulate neighborhood by neighborhood, corridor by corridor, and yes, sometimes street by street. And that's why I'm known as the pain in the ass at the planning department, because I try to poke on those. Miami is, as the mayor mentioned, an incredibly diverse city. And the problem with this diversity is that most of it is intangible. And often these elements are lost within the efforts of simplifying a code. And more often than not, we fail to integrate these elements that are intangible. So without the plugins, without the overlays, the apps of your operating system, basically, it is difficult to ensure our cities encourage diversity and celebrate the uniqueness that makes the sum of their parts. The Miami 21, while organizing the city in a predictable manner, providing a very, very clear and very user-friendly, needs these overlays and needs these appendices to help interpret and regulate the nuances that make communities unique. So let's take a look at a couple of these. The first ones that were rolled in with the Miami 21 were the NCDs. We also have NRDs and SAPs. For those of you that are not in Miami, I will tell you what they are. So NCDs are neighborhood conservation districts, and we have 3. Again, because each of the different zones, from a political standpoint, they had to be different. People requested during the process of the Miami 21 to make sure that they remained or that their character was retained within the code. And the NCDs was an attempt, and it was the overlay that did that. The NCDs were a method to protect the character and to also protect potentially the values of those communities. We also have the SAPs. The SAPs, as you can see there dotted in red, are the special area plans. And this was a way of trying to, in a way, they are large PUDs. They are planned unit developments of a minimum of 9 acres, 8.1 if you take your 10% waiver, and they are developer driven. And the problem with these, and again, I'm the one who's going to be poking at things, but the problem of these is that developers don't always follow through with the public, and in many cases, they end up not being contextually sensitive to the nature of neighborhoods. With some exceptions, and Francisco pointed at one, Brickell, in my opinion, is one of the best SAPs that the city has seen. It's in the urban core in Brickell. It's dense. It has towers. It activates the streets. It responds to transit. It responds to its responsibility to provide density in the urban core. And then there's others, and that's not Brickell. And as you can see, it's very, very difficult, by the way, to find pictures provided by developers that show context when they are putting their SAP on top. Why? Because of that. You can see how things don't fit. And they have been abused to a certain level. In fact, I would argue most of the time. I'll show you a picture of what I mean when they show context. If you can see no buildings around this project, all you see is green. And that is, that's something that started in the Bauhaus, for those of you that have an architecture background. But basically, it's the beauty of the building without necessarily taking into consideration the context around it. And yet, there is one more method of overlay, which is NRD. And the NRD was the brainchild of Francisco when we started talking about Wynwood. And I remember being at his office, and we said, look, we have to apply, do you remember that? We have to apply an NCD, and we said, no, this is not conservation, this is not conservation. So with a very simple stroke of his pencil, he said, no, this is an NRD, a Neighborhood Revitalization District, which gives us a little bit more freedom to ensure that changes were supposed to happen, while taking into consideration context and making sure that what we proposed had a positive effect, but it evolved the neighborhood into the right direction. And this is a simple zoning diagram that shows the kind of volumes that were proposed. I don't want to fail to mention that NRDs are city led and community driven. They're typically not developer driven, even though developers are stakeholders as well, and so they need to be part of the process. We need to make sure, of course, that whatever we propose as a change to the Miami 21 or any zoning code, things get built, things are economic, people make money. You don't make money, nothing gets built, zoning code, doesn't matter what you write in there. So we need to ensure that the economics work, and Wynwood was a great example. In fact, it's one of the hottest areas in the city of Miami, and in part it was because of the vision and the attention to detail that we gave it, and without a doubt, because we had a really incredibly strong structure underneath the Miami 21 that provided the skeleton, the bones, to ensure that there was predictability moving forward, even if there was an overlay. The last NRD, there's only two, the last NRD that was done was just north of it. And it's quite interesting because it's called Wynwood Norte. And it was a very different approach. This was led by the neighborhood association, who put their efforts together. They hired a planner, and in collaboration with the city, the planning department, put together this project, which protects, as you can see, this lower scale in the middle. It encourages development in the surroundings, and it requires affordable housing, an increase of affordable housing supply in the area, varied among different building types, creating a vertical income mix through typological variety. So affordability not just in towers, but affordability in a variety of buildings. The last thing that I wanted to mention was, and these are not overlays of the Miami 21, but these are three projects that I believe I would be remiss not to mention, and they were led by my wife, actually, my better half. But I feel that it's very important to mention because none of these, in my opinion, are really context sensitive enough unless you understand how the neighborhoods have evolved over time and how that character was created, how that character was massaged into place. So one of the ones that you probably heard this morning was the Shenandoah Historic Survey. And we use these surveys not just to look at the age of buildings, but actually at the character and their worth, and whether or not buildings that are in a neighborhood are contributing. And I'm not saying contributing from a historic preservation perspective, but rather contributing to a character that makes the neighborhood unique. And those are very, very important. Since we started this, we have looked at all those areas in Miami. Some of the ones that you see there were just where the NCDs and the NRDs, some SAPs, and again, I will stop using three-letter abbreviations. But what we are trying to do, at least from our perspective, is to add color to a code that provides incredible structure for the growth of Miami. I'll leave you with a final thought. In the search for a comprehensive regulatory framework and its administration, we always try to, as planners, to simplify complexity into overarching principles. And it is our job as planners to ensure that intangible elements that make our neighborhoods unique are not sacrificed in the interest of regulatory order. Diverse communities, and Miami has many of those, and it makes a very diverse city, depend on their unique makeup. And that is not always mathematical, it's not always parametric, and it doesn't always fit the transect. And it requires those layers, like the ones I just showed you, in order to navigate the nuances of place to ensure we don't lose our identity. Thank you. And with that, we can open up to questions, if anybody has any. Yes, ma'am. We will repeat the question if we can hear it, so please speak up. But
One of the things that I noticed that's missing from the panel is essentially a developer and then the current planning staff or zoning staff at the city. And one of my questions is really how much training, did you do with staff and or the developer once it was actually, the development community once it was actually adopted, and how much trouble did you find staff having shifting that mindset from a truly Euclidean zoning and applying that. And then from the development community, have you heard that they really do believe it's easier to understand as was originally intentioned, I guess?
The development community and everyone else went through 5 years of training because the process took 5 years. From start to finish. It was actually adopted at my last official meeting as mayor. So the evolution of Miami 21 was a very extensive one. As Anna pointed out, we actually had 500 meetings during those 5 years in each and every single neighborhood, carving away at some of the issues that Juan mentioned. It was the level of detail and trying to get to where we wanted to get with this massively democratic process of involving every single, very typically you'll see these things done in a neighborhood in a city, usually the financial district or a waterfront district. We went into each and every single neighborhood and had multiple public hearings in all those neighborhoods. The development community, the planning community, everybody was an integral part of the process. Obviously, sometimes the development community, tried to push back a bit. It was interesting because I don't know if you guys remember this, one of the things that I said during the process is you'll see when all is said and done, because by way of background, most of you I'm sure have experienced multiple city or county commission hearings where people are throwing rocks, stones, hitting each other with bats over their head. And it's usually a fight between the developer trying to get more than they maybe should get, and the neighborhood associations fighting and saying, no, you shouldn't get anything, right? Well, I said during the process at one point, I said to them, you'll see, when it's all said and done, who's going to be left standing as people that we've done everything possible to try to help them and work with them. It's going to be the land use attorneys, because before this, nobody, seriously, you needed to hire a land use attorney and have 5 Ouija boards to understand what 11,000 said. So the land use attorneys and the neighborhood associations. Now, you might ask yourself, why the neighborhood associations? Because they are no longer on Miami TV every week, standing up and fighting and getting their faces on TV, fighting for the peeps, and in many cases, planning to run their own campaigns down the road. So those were the two that at the very end seemed to be most affected by the development community at all, nothing. And it was all because of that training process. So I'll give you another example of that. So when I started talking about green buildings in Miami, and before Miami 21 codified it, but even before I was out promoting it, and what I did was I didn't just start showing pictures of iceberg meltings and polar bears and things like that, because I felt it was kind of difficult for me to convince a developer that their one building in one street in one city is going to put an end to climate change. And so, by the way, I come from a real estate development background and practice in law. And one of the things that I did is I brought down developers, architects, engineers, planners, everybody that from other cities that have been involved in green buildings successfully around the country, to promote it to their counterparts in Miami, to show them that if you do it right, you do it from the beginning, from the get-go, it's perfectly possible to build a building that's either going to cost you the same if it weren't green or a nominal increase. But by the way, here's what's going to happen to your rents, to your cap rates, to your everything else, the attraction, the marketability, the resale value. And after a while, even before the code was adopted, they were starting to build green buildings in the city at a pretty substantial pace because they came to understand that it was in their best interest. They wanted to do the right thing anyway, but now they also understood it was in their best interest. After I left office, one of them called me one day, said, "I want to buy you a drink to say thank you." I said, "Sure, I'll come over." So I went over and met with him, and I said, "What's the thank you for?" He goes, "I just got my report, my operating expenses for last year. I saved $1 million on operating expenses." So we made them a part of the process so that they understood how this was the right thing to do, and it was also going to benefit them. And so I think as a result of that, we got, and so when we proposed, I actually proposed LEED Silver, thinking that I was going to have to settle for just basic LEED. And no one, I mean no one, showed up to oppose it. I should have asked for more, but.
I would like to add on the what we did, understanding exactly where you're coming from. We met before we started, and I would like to recognize there's someone here that worked very closely with me, Rogelio Madan, who now is in Miami Beach, so he will be able to attest to this too. We understood in the planning department the building and zoning would be critical as well, because we can plan, but someone has to believe in the vision that we were trying to do. So even before we started putting anything on paper, we had meetings at a park at lunchtime to show people other cities and the vision that other cities and how other cities what had become. So it was more like, instead of a planning lesson, it was really, this is what cities do. So there was an understanding of what we wanted to do. So that started way before we started actually the process with staff. We started having meetings to understand, and people were actually raising questions that we were able to answer. So our intention was to make sure that everyone understood the vision, that it was being carried, because at the end, it was going to be them mostly who the ones that were going to approve it, look at it, look at plans. So that was critical in our process that we had not done before. The other thing was, we knew that it was going to be, when it was approved, we already had targeted 6 months before, so we had decided when is going to be the day where we say this is passed, is approved, is ready. We understood that it had to be ready the day, because if it had to be approved and a developer or an architect had to come in and someone had to say, no, but you have to wait 6 months because nothing is happening. So in the background, the planning department was having sessions with every single department. So we had it at the front end showing what the vision was, and at the end, these are the regulations and these are the things that we're looking. So they were already part of the process. So on the day that it was approved, that we said this goes off, it's active on certain day, and it was, everyone was ready. Not only the planning staff, but it was building, it was zoning, it was public works, it was everyone that had to do in reviewing any kind of plan. So that was important, because if not, it would have been, I think it would have been a failure. And with the community as well, they knew what we were going to do. We met with them. We went, and maybe that was part of the 500 meetings. We first went out and said, what is it that you want? What is it that your issues are? What are your concerns? We went back again to them and said, I think we heard this. Then we went back again and said, this is what we're doing. So it was, and like every contract, not everyone was happy, but it was, there was an understanding by the time the code, the homeowners, like the mayors, the homeowners knew exactly, you know, it was interesting because in my career, it was the only time you could have a conversation of everyone telling you the zoning classification, like if it was first and last name, T64, T65, and everyone knew about it. It was just common language. It was easy. And probably the other effort that we did that I think it was key, we had a website. And in that one, we first had a website that was done, you know, with the planning lingo. Clearly, we understood that this had to be open for anyone, not necessarily planners or architects. So in the planning department, we had staff that actually her background was she had a bachelor in arts, not planning, not architecture, not engineering. So she created the website. So she asked the same questions that anyone would ask. So by the time someone would be able to go in, it was in plain English. It wasn't you didn't have to have a master's in urban planning to understand it. And that was key because we started with that and then we had to take a steps back and say, too convoluted, easy. So it was another approach. And the other thing, clearly, in a diverse community as we had to understand how are we reaching the different communities. The Haitian community is different than the African-American community and than the Hispanic community. We would go and approach them in the way that everyone was more used to, more comfortable in order to make sure that the information went out. So that was a process, and that probably was part of the 500 meetings. But there was that training for staff, which was key, making the information easy to understand for people. And the developers and the land use attorneys, they were permanent fixtures because they needed to understand how the things were going. So that was an approach. It was key, I believe, to that we actually got it successfully approved.
And I'll add very briefly, because I thought the question was absolutely on point, that the only two people sitting at this particular table that can really, as we say, I guess literally translated from Spanish, sing victory, right? That can say that they accomplished their job are former Mayor Diaz and former Director Gelabert Sanchez, because they did what they set out to do, which is to make it simple, make it intuitive. The hard work, the sorting out the logic, the solving of the Rubik's Cube, as Juan put it earlier, was really performed incredibly well by them. That has to be part of the answer to unraveling the mysteries of zoning and having them be as functional as they can be, right? To implement a rational, logical set of regulations that facilitate the work of coordinating development in a given city. The rest is training, the rest is application, and that never ends. So the specific answer to your question is never enough training. It so happens that the Chief of Comprehensive Planning of the City of Miami, active as we speak today, happens to be sitting here. Sue Trone is her name, and you can ask her these questions. I won't point you out, Sue. But she's here, and she can attest to the fact that no matter how thorough the training work was done at the time in order to ensure an effective implementation of Miami 21, it evolves, as every zoning ordinance should evolve. Technologies change, and no matter how simple we wanted to make the permitting processes, we recently in the city of Miami went through the process of making it electronic, the permit processing and the public hearing processing, et cetera. That too requires inevitably a sorting out of all the processes involved. And so that training process never ends. That's always work in progress. And that's what any given active municipal official has to be engaged in. And I think it's a great idea, Juan, an oversight on your part, perhaps, not to have included an active member of the City of Miami planning staff, although I'm not sure they would have willingly come to take the heat, as sometimes one has to. But that's a very valid point as well, because in the end, they are the ones who deal with it on a daily basis.
But it's the actual city government that is hesitant to make this jump from Euclidean to a form-based code. They're afraid that it's too much of a shift and too much of a risk. So have any experience dealing with those who were empowered city leadership, who were too hesitant about going with a whole new code as opposed to revamping the old one, and what eventually won them over to implement this type of strategy?
I mean, the simplest answer is relationships, like everything else in life, which, by the way, we don't have in our political system today. Everybody's fighting with each other. But, you're absolutely right. I mean, there were, people in that commission who, when I introduced myself, when I said I had no experience in land use plan, I mean, they were even like much less experienced than I was. And so trying to go to them and talk to them about like this massive project was not the easiest thing in the world. But it's a function of the relationships that you build up, that we all built up during those 8 years. That, number one, they trust you, that you're doing it for the right reasons, and they begin to see the value in it. I think, and Anna, this group can speak to that a lot more than I can, but to me, form-based code is that sort of that three-word vocabulary that,
Three-letter acronym.
Yeah, but it's part of the current vocabulary, like critical race theory, defund the police, it's sort of like one of those like bad words, and people don't know what it is. Just, form-based code, no, it's got to be bad. It's probably some sort of a communist or socialist conspiracy to take over our city or something, It's really. And I think what you have to do is you have to dedicate the time. The problem with being elected is, look, think about this. So one of the great, in my opinion, disadvantages of term limits is that how can you get an elected official to think long-term when he or she only has 8 years in office? I devoted 5 out of my 8 years to this process. The first year I was still trying to find where the bathrooms were, right? And then, another 5 years to get this passed. My staff thought I was like ready to be committed. They were like, what are you doing? Give this up. First of all, it's never going to pass, and I told them, I said, well, if it doesn't, then I'll go down in flames with it, but I'm going to get this done. But it's just very difficult to find that elected official, especially in light, for example, of all the other problems that I mentioned earlier mayors have to deal with. I mean, can you imagine somebody now in the middle of a pandemic talking about land use or developing, Milwaukee 21? Hey, it's just, not to pick on anybody from Wisconsin, if anybody's here from Wisconsin, but it's a very difficult thing to get that sort of commitment. And then it involves a relationship between the electeds and staff, which has to also be about trust. Because I suspect, I'm not going to speak for them, but I suspect that in their many, many years of serving the public, that they were probably more inclined to meet elected officials who were just there for the photo ops, or these kinds of things were just sort of like, cute things to say, but there was no real political will to get it done. And I think that's important too. I would say those factors.
I'd like to share an anecdote, which, Francisco, I hope you don't hate me for it. But an anecdote from the sidelines, and it's when Francisco took the reins from Anna. Francisco and I had been friends for years, and he took the reins just after the mayor. There was a new mayor after you, and I called him. I think it was a Wednesday. And he wouldn't pick up. And I called him on a Thursday, and he wouldn't pick up. And I called him on a Friday, and he wouldn't pick up. And I called a friend of ours, and I said, why is Francisco not calling me? Why, is he mad at me or something? And he said to me, that's not it. He said, the new mayor wants to ditch the Miami 21 and go back to the old code. You probably remember that. But I've just mentioned this because, as you said, planning, unfortunately, is a 4-year term also. It's political. And without those relationships and without the incredible muscle that it takes to get a code like this through And not only to get it through, but also to make sure that it doesn't go away after 4 years, it's laudable. It's almost impossible. It's sort of like a Marvel story from comic books. So anyway, that's my anecdote, and he called me back after. I think I think you resolved the issue and then called me back. I think it was like a month later.
Hello, my question is about the roadway standards and streetscape standards in Miami 21. I was curious what challenges may have arisen from your approach in the past, say any increase in maintenance responsibilities or permitting challenges, and how the approach to future repairs may change as a result of the evaluation, or of course things like FDOT's own standards for local governments becoming more context sensitive. Thank you.
Repeat the question.
Certainly. I will try to summarize the question, and please let me know if I miss anything. But I think the question essentially is about roadway standards and what protocols or regulations there might be as part of or complementary to Miami 21 to begin to address that side of development, right? How to obtain a proper relationship between the right-of-way and private property, and to what extent other jurisdictions can come on board with the vision or present to some extent an obstacle in the implementation of the vision. Roughly right?
Well, I think from a local government perspective, I think what I'm curious about is with the roadway standards and the streetscaping standards that you adopted going forward as a city, did you find that, of course, I'm sure some benefits, did you find that there were any challenges in terms of your ability as a city to go forward with a coordinated planning and permitting process in which your maintenance responsibilities increased, and how would you adjust going forward with people?
Understood. So the finer point that she just addressed is to what extent are there potential conflicts between standards that one wishes to impose at the local level, at the municipal level, vis-a-vis other jurisdictions that may have authority over major rights of way, and especially at the state and federal level, other rights of way. And I will tell you that is one of the great challenges for planners. It certainly has been mine. I will tell you that Miami 21 in particular was nothing if not visionary in attempting to deal with all of these issues comprehensively, holistically, as was put before. And we were very ambitious, even in the drafting of the document, in attempting to calibrate the right-of-way standards, the configurations of the different street types, even to the extent of providing architectural guidelines for the different sections of corridors, different levels of corridors, etc. Only to find that planning doesn't sign off on those permits. Zoning doesn't sign off on those permits. The building department does not sign off on those permits. Those reside within the jurisdiction of the Public Works Department at the municipal level, and then other agencies, which you all know about at different levels above that. And they have their own standards, and they have their own preferences, and they have their own guidelines that they go by, and they are not necessarily compatible or even reciprocal with those that we promulgated as part of Miami 21. That to me remains, and much can be written about this, and much exploration can be done, and research can be done, and I would encourage any of you who care to do so to definitely do so. There is clearly a fault line that lies along the property line of every property I think in the United States, right? Between private property and how that development there can be regulated and calibrated and controlled, right? And the public right-of-way, which can, and surprisingly often does, absolutely ignore the reality of development and private property in terms of responding to it. I will give you as a perfect example, Wynwood. Wynwood, which is absolutely right now in the process of redevelopment and revitalization, is a former industrial zone, right? And the infrastructure was built to support the industrial program that it responded to previously, warehouses with large trucks, careening through, and few, if any, pedestrians. Now take that as a point of reference and turn it now into a mixed-use, high-density, high-intensity setting, and clearly infrastructure that has to be put in place is a dramatically different infrastructure. Clearly it takes time, clearly it takes money, clearly it's complex, but unless there is perfect alignment between all the jurisdictional entities, it's simply impossible to accomplish. So have there been challenges and difficulties? There have been, and there continue to be. I think Miami 21 did as much as any zoning document I've ever seen, and I've seen many, to put forth a vision that is coherent, that sort of aims at coherence between the public right-of-way and private property. But ultimately, and this I think goes in part also to the form-based code versus Euclidean zoning ordinance that the gentleman was asking about before, ultimately, all of these regulations in the end respond to a culture that exists in a given place. And unless there is a culture that accepts a new vision for development, for a new model of development, including the rights of way, you're really swimming against the stream every step of the way. And that's sort of the difficult work that we are all confronted with on a daily basis. I'm sure you know it full well in firsthand.
So unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. Yes?
Well, I recall during the adoption hearings that there was vehement opposition and it almost derailed the code, and that came from the AIA and high-profile practitioners, of architects. So the grounds were that the form-based code would be an end to creativity and modernism, even though the code was silent on architecture. So my question is, in the last 10 years, have the leadership members here ever heard a retraction or a softening or a coming together from the AIA community?
Or an apology, perhaps?
Or something to show that architecture didn't come to an end when the code was adopted.
By the way, it was one particular architect who sort of did that, and obviously the proof is in the pudding. Right. I mean, look at the buildings. Nothing else to say. Right?
Has the organization,
No, I don't think so. Not formally.
They've come out to oppose adoption of form-based codes, just like they did in Miami, and so we realized then that it was a thing that's occurring.
Really?
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
If I may, just to clarify, I come from a family of architects, so I think you will find hard-pressed for an architect to come and say to apologize. However,
Anna, you want to repeat the question?
It's about, there was some criticism or concerns from some architects regarding form-based code. I think there's a fear, and I would like to say maybe split it into two. I think there's a misunderstanding of form-based code, and that's why at the beginning when I stood up, I clarified the one in Miami, and I think many that are being done right now deals with use. And Miami 21 really, because it was citywide, it was not a form-based code that would tell you the size of windows. That it did not do. And we were purposely doing for that, so we had to explain. However, going back to Andrew, your question, at the process, we had that issue come up, and we actually had an architect, a firm, national firm. We gave them, we had a project on a particular site. We gave them the plans, and we said, would you, under Miami 21, design the building? Same lot, Miami 21 regulations. The design, we actually took it to the city commission to show the one with the Miami 21 was creative. It had everything that we had asked, everything that the photograph that I think Francisco showed, the pedestrian, habitable space. It had an interesting creative facade. The other one was just how much square footage can we put on this site under the Euclidean. So at that moment, it was a moment of silence because sometimes we can speak a lot, but a photo, a picture will show you many things. And it was clearly, but we did actually going through that exercise in order to put that one to rest, to show, no, it has nothing to do with the regulation. It really has to do with the creativity of the architect, because the regulation under Miami 21, we were specific that we were not regulating the size of windows or the color of the parapet. That was not Miami 21. If you're doing it for a one main street, you might be able to do it, but that was not the intention, not from the get-go. But anyway, we did do that exercise precisely for that.
And I'll say one brief more thing, which is change is always difficult, inevitably. How can you prove to anyone that the change from what they know today, which good, bad, or indifferent, they're familiar with and comfortable with at some level, how do you prove to them that it's not going to get worse as a result of any change you're proposing? And admittedly, Miami 21 and form-based codes can be rather ambitious and transformational, right, by intent in terms of the new model they propose. So I completely understand, and it's human nature that it may cause some trepidation. We received pushback not only from the design industry that kept accusing us of trying to promote the wedding cake model of New York in the 1920s, which was easy to prove was not the case, and nevertheless, they never went away. To this day, there are some who say it. Land use attorneys, go figure, argued that there would be takings left and right as a result of this new onerous zoning set of regulations, and Bert J. Harry's claims were going to be, the norm of the day for years to come. Not one, right? And so there are many anecdotes and stories along these lines that we could share with you, and I wish we could. But the point is that yes, but clearly the change, the transition between a Euclidean zoning ordinance as a land use regime and a form-based code is significant. I think it's worth considering, and we would like to propose to you, at least I would like to propose to you, that the results of Miami 21 over the last 10 years are a good testament to its ultimate effectiveness.
So we're running 7 minutes late. You guys still have about 20 minutes for your coffee break. I'd like to thank former Mayor Diaz, Director Garcia, and Director Helaber Sanchez for being here with us. Thank you all for being here.